Welcome to the 902 podcast, the official podcast of the Lancaster County Sheriff's Office in Lincoln, Nebraska. I'm Captain Vik, and I want to thank you for tuning in. This podcast will give you an inside look at LSO with topics and guests to discuss public safety issues impacting Lancaster County. Be sure to subscribe for highlights on news, cases, and the people working for you at LSO. You can also follow us across social media by searching for @LSO Nebraska. That's @LSO Nebraska on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube. Welcome to the 902 podcast. Today we've got Sheriff Terry Wagner with us. Sheriff, thanks for being here.
Good afternoon. Great to be here.
Chief Deputy Ben Houchin's in the house as well.
Yeah, thank you.
And we also are joined by Captain Tommy Trotter of LSO's Patrol Division. Tommy, thanks for coming.
You bet. Good afternoon.
So we wanted to have you on today to talk a little bit about distracted driving, but before we do that, let's hear a little bit about you. What brought you into law enforcement?
Well, I moved here from North Platte, where I grew up, and was going to go to college back in the late 90s, or mid-90s. And when I got out here, I got a job catching shoplifters in a retail-type place while I was saving money to go to college. And that got me to meet several law enforcement officers throughout, when we would stop people for shoplifting or catch employees stealing things, we'd call the police and they'd show up. And I got to meet a lot of police officers. And they were, I guess, a good influence on me and changed the direction of where I wanted to go for college and what I wanted to do with my life. And so I completed my college and started applying. And this was really the only place that was recommended to me to apply to. So it was the first and only place that I applied, and it was recommended by several law enforcement officers in this area from other agencies who said that LSO was the place you want to be. They always thought that LSO had a great reputation, and so they pushed me this way, and I'm sure glad I did, because it's been almost 29 years since I've been here. And, it was a good choice for me and a great fit. Growing up in North Platte, I lived in a rural area, and so when we would call or we would see a cruiser driving down the street, it was always a sheriff's deputy. So it kind of fit how I grew up as well.
Yeah, well, and we're always telling new recruits that you can be the best fit for us, but if we're not a good fit for you, it's not going to work. So I'm glad that it was a good fit. So over the years, almost 29 years, like you said, you certainly haven't always done what you did now. So tell us about your career a little bit. What path did you take here at LSO?
But wait a minute, you also kind of have a milestone too.
I do. Yes, I was the deputy that replaced Sheriff Wagner when he won the election in November 1994. That created an opening, and I was the guy that got hired.
So the first deputy that you hired, Sheriff?
As sheriff, yes.
Okay.
Yep.
So that's how it all started.
That's how it started, and I was fortunate enough because back then we would go many months between hirings. So the chief was hired directly right before I was, but it was 18 months.
Yeah,
before there was another opening.
I was on the bottom of the barrel for a long time.
So Ben, you're the last one from the previous, maybe
Sheriff
administration. Yeah,
was the one who hired me. Yep.
And then 18 months later, Tommy, you got the nod when Sheriff Wagner came in.
Yep, I had applied actually in January of that year, but there weren't any openings.
Okay.
And it just shows there was no turnover.
Yeah.
This is an agency where people stayed their whole career.
Right.
And I was on a hiring list where there was no opening, so it was really just an eligibility list. And if the sheriff hadn't won that election, I don't know that I would have gotten hired.
But you did.
But we did. We both won.
So what'd you do from there?
So after I got certified in Grand Island at the training center, then I came back and I went through FTO, worked patrol, and was on night shift for quite a while. I applied for and became a canine handler, did that for about 6 years on patrol. Then I was selected to be a criminal investigator, where I went and served for a brief time because then I got promoted to sergeant pretty early on in my career. So as a sergeant, then I went back to patrol and supervised a shift of deputies. Did that for quite a while, but I've also, when I was a sergeant, I worked in the court services division. I was the records sergeant, the last one that we had here at the office before we switched to a civilian supervisor. I then was the first personnel and training sergeant that worked in the position where Sergeant Bolzer does now.
Yep.
And after that, I went to the civil division. I was a sergeant in the civil area. And after that, I went back to patrol and got promoted to captain. And since I've been promoted, I've oversaw the support services division. And now I'm in the patrol division, which is what we're going to talk about today.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate you being here to talk about that. So give us a little overview of your division as it is today.
So the patrol division is made up of about 44 deputies. It is our largest division that we have here at the office. So I have 6 sergeants that work under me, and I directly supervise them. Each of them has a shift of anywhere between 4 and 8 deputies assigned to them. And it's kind of unique the way we operate here, where we have 6 patrol shifts. So each one of those sergeants, 3 of them have Thursday, Friday, Saturday off, and 3 of them have Sunday, Monday, Tuesday off. So they all work a 4 days, 10-hour shifts. And we have day shifts, second shift, and overnights, the third shift.
So how far back does that structure go for patrol? When I started, 17 years ago, we had that in all but day shift, and I think it was because of some shortages at the time. But I'm guessing it started even sometime before that.
But
Yeah.
1980,
Really?
actually, that schedule was proposed by former Captain Owen Yardley at the time. The sheriff listen to this, gas was projected to exceed $2 a gallon. And so they were
Say it ain't so.
Yeah, so they were looking for ways to conserve fuel and to cut cost, fleet operation cost. And this schedule came out as being one of the ways where we could cut, eliminate 1 day of driving per week, and save the cost. And the sheriff agreed and implemented the 4-day work week as a cost-saving measure for gasoline.
The deputies just love it, though. They having the 3 days off. If when we get short and we start talking about going to 8 and things like that, it really concerns them, because they really enjoy that part, and I think it's a huge morale boost to be able to do that for them.
Well, it goes along with our wellness plan too. I mean, when you're working third shift, and anybody out there that's ever worked the overnight shift, you either stay on that sleep schedule, and even on your days off, you stay up all night, or you try to get back to some sense of normalcy. And having 3 days off, you can sort of do that, and especially if you have a family. It makes it a little bit more palatable. So
The other thing it affords for us is everybody works on Wednesday.
Yep.
So we take half of our people and we're able to go and do training. So we do in-service training 2 Wednesdays a month, and then the specialized units train on the other Wednesdays each month. So we are able to keep our deputies highly trained and up to their sharpest.
Yeah, absolutely. Ben, you touched on a little bit that, there's sometimes talk of maybe a shift or two having to move away from that, but that's because we have some vacancies right now, and it's just a reality that we're dealing with in law enforcement. So how do you manage that, Tommy?
We've had a lot of guys working overtime and spreading it pretty thin, but we've been able to maintain our 10-hour shifts to this point. If we lose any more people, we may have to come up with a different way in the meantime until we get back up to full strength.
The one thing we were talking about too is we have a lot of specialty positions that deputies are in and doing some very important work. But our number one job a lot of times is we got to have people out there taking the calls for service. And we've had to pull people from those specialty positions. And I hate having to do that. But again, keeping the 10 hours is very important too. So I'm hoping that we have some people, and even people out here listening to us now will decide, hey, this is something I want to do, and come apply for us.
And if they do, they can find us at www.joinlso.com. We'd love to hear from you. We'll have an entry-level process opening here in the middle of April, so definitely look forward to that. But your team has a lot of area to cover, Tommy, so talk about that a little bit. What's our jurisdiction when it comes to patrol?
So our sheriff's office patrol division, we respond to all the calls for service in the rural areas outside of the city of Lincoln, but in all areas of Lancaster County. It's about 839 square miles, including 23 cities, towns, and villages. But we also have 12 lakes and NRD recreation areas, which can be heavily populated during the summertime. So we try to hit all of those areas and spread our deputies out into different districts. But on any shift, we also may have a deputy assigned to the Waverly City or to Hickman. We have canine operations that are out on patrol as well, and a little bit of everything.
Yeah, when you say another city, Branched Oak, during the summertime, it becomes another town out there for us. And it's not real close to the city. I mean, it's out there in the middle of, not nowhere, but it's out there a ways. And it certainly takes several of our deputies on calls during the summertime a lot.
Well, Sheriff, every year you give a state of the office address, and it surprises me every year when I hear the population of the county, because it keeps growing, which is a good thing. But the percent of that population that is outside the city limits, talk about that a little bit. How over the years, how is that population managed?
Well, right now, I think the population in Lancaster County is about 330,000. And about 30,000, 32,000 of those people live outside the corporate city limits of Lincoln. So long ago, when we had a space needs analysis done and a workload analysis, the consultants projected that, on the fringes of Lincoln, there would be acreage development, new development going in, and as the population increased, our population in the county would rise that we're responsible for, and then it got to a certain point, and the city would annex that. And then we would lose that population and the number of people we were responsible for. And that sawtooth effect it happens over and over and over again. And so, at one time, the Highlands were our responsibility. It was not part of the city limits, and we responded to the Highlands for calls for service. And then when that got so big, and there was some political stuff going on with the SID and, that kind of the viability of it. But the city finally annexed the Highlands, and then it became the city of Lincoln's responsibility.
Yeah. So, Tommy, we have 23 cities, towns, and villages in Lancaster County. Obviously, the biggest one being Lincoln has their own police department, but none of the others do.
None of the others do. And so if you live anywhere outside of the city of Lincoln but within our county and you need a law enforcement officer, when you call 911, our office will be the deputy will be the person that shows up at your door. And so we take anywhere between 10 and 12,000 calls a year. And it could be for burglaries or criminal mischiefs, or we work coroner calls, we work traffic offenses. I mean, just the whole gamut of police operations.
Yep. And you mentioned contract towns earlier. Can you talk about that and how that works for us?
Yeah. Within Hickman and Waverly, they've each contracted with us so that they have nearly full-time people, deputies from our office, providing police services for the city of Waverly. Several deputies fulfill that contract, and that's their assignment. They're just within Waverly working like a town cop would in a different area. Hickman has that as well, but we also have several other towns that pay for part-time police services. So we contract with many of the bigger villages and towns in Lancaster County.
And Sheriff, probably more cost effective than any of them standing up their own police department by their own?
Oh, absolutely. Many cities in Nebraska the size of Waverly, which is about 3,400 people now, will have their own police department, between 5 and 7 officers. So then you've just got a ton of unrealized expenses there, wages, you've got the training expense, you've got uniforms, you've got vehicle, you got to pay for communications, you may have to pay for jail space to house prisoners that you make arrests for. So this is, while we are expensive, from one perspective, we're much cheaper than getting ready to stand up their own police department. No question about it.
Well, we also have some expertise that they wouldn't
Yes.
have too. We have our crash team, we have our crime scenes, we have our investigation unit. So when something major happens to those cities, it's just not the Waverly deputy that's working that. We bring out all our expertise and our people on that to take it, and that's would cost them a ton.
And we don't charge them anything extra for that.
Right.
So,
Yep.
They contract with us for those deputies, but if we have a major case, we'll bring in whatever resources are necessary to investigate that or solve that case.
Well, Waverly has its own school in town, but we've got a couple other rural schools that are kind of towns in and of themselves too. So talk a little bit about that, Tommy. What are we doing there?
So we have 4 high schools and other schools that go along with those in each district, depending on which one it is. But all 4 of them, like you say, are very highly populated when school is open. So just as an example, at the Norris School District down in the southeast part of the county, they can have almost up to 3,000 people on their campus on any given day. And a response there, could take a while depending on where a deputy was coming from. But each of those schools has a school resource officer who was one of our deputies who was selected to fulfill a 3-year specialized spot. And so each of those schools has an SRO on most days, and they are highly trained in how to work in a school and how to interact with the students and the staff. And it provides us, I guess, a good resource to give to the schools so that somebody's always there in case they need something.
Well, when we come back, we're going to talk a little bit with Captain Trotter about distracted driving. Stick with us, and we'll be right back.
If you want a challenging career, a career where you can make a difference in your life, your family's life, and the lives of those in your community, come and join the Lancaster County Sheriff's Office. To learn more or to apply, visit us online at www.joinlso.com.
Okay, welcome back. Thanks for being with us again. Captain Trotter's here, and we want to focus on distracted driving. And right now we're going through an initiative with our patrol deputies. Can you talk a little bit about that, Captain Trotter?
So in addition to responding to calls for service, our deputies also do a lot of traffic enforcement when they have time during their shift. And we look at traffic enforcement as a good way to remind citizens to obey the laws of driving. And it reduces crashes, reduces injuries. We also do a lot of DUI enforcement and things of that nature. But specifically throughout the year, we receive grants from some agencies, such as the Nebraska Office of Highway Safety or some other places, and we will do a specialized enforcement. So right now, the one that we are performing this week is called You Text, or You Drive, You Text, You Pay. And it is an enforcement action that is targeting distracted driving, which would include people texting on their phones or playing on a tablet or a mobile computer, any of those things that takes away your attention from the road.
So I did a little bit of looking on NHTSA's website, which is the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, with this initiative, and there's a stat on there. So sending and receiving a single text for 5 seconds at 55 miles an hour means that you're going approximately the length of a football field with your eyes closed. So, I mean, if people that are listening to this in the car right now, I mean, if you can imagine that, closing your eyes and driving the length of a football field, a lot can happen in that time. So, and another stat from their website, in 2021, unfortunately, there were 3,500 people, actually 3,522 people killed nationally by distracted driving. So certainly something that we're working on in Nebraska and something that we're working on at the Lancaster County Sheriff's Office. But Nebraska does have some laws that govern that stuff. Can you talk about that a little bit, Captain Trotter?
Yeah, specifically, Nebraska has a law called the Use of Handheld Wireless Communication Device. And it basically says that if you read, type, or send written communication while operating a motor vehicle in motion, then you could be guilty of this. So it would include a text message on a phone, instant message on an app, sending emails, or browsing internet websites. There are fines that go along with that, and it's $200 up to $500, depending on if you've been convicted of that before, and it can include 3 points off of your driver's license.
So what are some of the things that LSO is doing at a functional level? What is our part in this process?
So currently, with this enforcement action that we're taking right now, deputies drive around and they look for those things that kind of would remind you of a drunk driver. So if you see a vehicle that's swerving or sitting through a green light or braking when they shouldn't be, deputies will drive up and get close to see if they can find out if the person's on a handheld device or doing something that's making them be distracted from what they should be doing, and that's safely driving.
Yep.
Another thing, when crashes do occur and we're concerned that somebody was using their telephone, we do have the technology now to be able to go back and get into that phone and see if they were texting during that time of the crash. And and extra charges and things that can occur from that. So people need to know that we do look into that part, and we're going to try to determine why the crash happened, and if texting's part of it.
Certainly something we rely on our electronic evidence unit to help us with, and they can determine that even after a crash has taken place if someone has been using their phone, and that plays a role in the crash.
Yep.
Another example of, I guess, how we're involved in this initiative is something that we're doing right now. We're trying to bring awareness to this through social media, but also through this podcast, so that people are taking responsible steps when they're communicating with their phones in a car. Specifically, Ben and Tommy, you guys are both parents and have kids that are kind of the age where you start to have some teenage drivers. What can parents do when it comes to distracted driving?
I've reinforced with my children. Our two boys have been, over the years, told not to text or drive. And if they see me doing it or my wife doing it, they would tell us as well. So it's something that if your children are riding in the back seat and you just don't think they're paying attention, they are always seeing what you're doing, and you need to lead by example and make sure that you're using the voice to text, or just wait till you get to the next stop, when you stop your car.
Yeah, other than receiving SWAT calls and things like that on my phone, there's not been very often that there's not been a text that I could not wait and look at after I got stopped or where I needed to go. And with I have a 14-year-old who's learning to drive and has a school permit, and she understands it. And we've made it very clear, if you're texting and Dad catches you, the car is going to sit for a while. And she understands that, and she likes to be able to use her car, so that's it. And she also has our sister sitting in the car beside her, and she's my little narc and would be more than happy to tell on her sister to get her in trouble.
Yeah, well, I think it just drives the point home, like you said, Tommy, leading by example and just having that talk with your kids about the dangers that distracted driving can bring, because we've obviously seen it firsthand, and it's not always a pretty picture, and unfortunately, like we said, over 3,500 people lost their lives back in 2021 from distracted driving. So something we want to play a part in stopping. Another point for kids is Nebraska has a graduated driver's licensing system now. So you don't just turn 16 and then magically get your driver's license anymore. You have to actually go through some probationary steps to have that happen. And I think it's worth parents reminding kids that if they get a violation during that time, they can actually delay the point at which they're going to get their driver's license. So just a couple extra hammers in there to try and hopefully learn some lessons without having to learn them the hard way on the street. So any other thoughts about the patrol division?
Right now we're concentrating on this. You drive, you text, you pay. And so we're doing saturation patrols all this week, but we do these quite often. And the next one coming up is surrounding April 20th, and we're going to then focus on drug impaired drivers. And so that'll be another enforcement action that we're going to take. And then in May, around Memorial Day weekend, we will do the click it or ticket enforcement action, which is another nationwide program that we receive grants, and we go out and we try to make sure that people are following the law, but also helping them help themselves by being buckled up in their cars.
That's the funny thing too, is like the fatalities, thank God they've gone down over the years through our careers, but most of them end up being people who are not seatbelted in. And it made a true believer out of me to wear the thing, because it does save lives.
I think it's taken almost a generation since seatbelt laws and seatbelt, became mandatory. It's taken almost a generation. Our kids wouldn't think about riding in a car now without being belted in. Mm-hmm. But there's those of us that grew up without seatbelts, we never wore seatbelts when we were younger until we were forced to by the law. And I think the same thing holds true with texting. I think it's a new thing, but now our kids will say, that's not safe, don't text when you drive, and they'll be the ones to lead the fight in the future, not to text and drive.
Absolutely. Well, Captain Trotter, we really want to thank you for joining us today, telling us a little bit about the patrol division, and thanks for all that you and your team do.
Thank you.
With that, we just want to remind all of our listeners, especially now, but through all times in the year, please don't text and drive, and make sure that you're wearing your seatbelt. You can find more information about careers at the Lancaster County Sheriff's Office by going to joinlso.com. And you can also subscribe to the 902 podcast on Spotify, Apple, or wherever you enjoy podcasts. Be sure to tune in for future episodes. And in between those, you can reach us on social media by searching for @LSO Nebraska, or send your questions in via email at lso@lancaster.ne.gov. Thanks for listening.